Welcome back. Question for you. What's in a name? Well, for one thing, the chance to mislead. The partisan press has inaccurately described President Trump's executive order to temporarily halt travel from 7 Mideastern countries as a Muslim ban. Now, some Christian leaders have bought into that description and announced their opposition. Miranda Khan has more.
JD, according to CNN, 100 evangelical leaders are calling out to the president in hopes that he'll reconsider his temporary ban on refugees. The network reports the ad will be published in the Washington Post. But if today was any indication of the president's intentions, those Christian leaders may have an uphill battle.
Courts seem to be so political. I don't ever want to call a court biased, so I won't call it biased.
President Trump blasted the court system today while addressing law enforcement officials in Washington.
It would be so great for our justice system if they would be able to read a statement and do what's right.
The remarks come just a day after the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals agreed to hear additional arguments from a government lawyer defending the president's temporary ban on 7 predominantly Muslim countries.
And I heard things that I couldn't believe.
One of the most notable exchanges happened when the Solicitor General for the state of Washington claimed Trump's temporary ban was based on discrimination towards Muslims.
Your Honor, the case law from this court and the Supreme Court is very clear that to prove religious discrimination, we just need to prove that it was motivated in part by a desire to harm Muslims.
How do you infer that desire if, in fact, the vast majority of Muslims are unaffected?
I mean, the public statements from the president and his top advisors reflecting that intent are strong evidence, certainly at this pleading stage, to allow us to go forward on that claim.
So far, I haven't heard a lot of reference to evidence and a lot more references to allegations, and I don't think allegations cut it at this stage.
The court says it will issue a ruling sometime this week, but as we've heard from several legal experts, this matter will likely head to the U.S. Supreme Court. JD, back to you.
Thanks very much, Miranda. Well, let's call on one of those aforementioned legal experts, famed attorney Alan Dershowitz, former professor at Harvard Law School, Newsmax contributor, author of the book Electile Dysfunction, a guide for unaroused voters. So, Alan, we always appreciate your time. And I understand that you appeared recently on CNN saying overturning this executive order will create or cause chaos. Your reasons for that, sir?
No, I just think that overturning it now on a temporary basis, undoing the injunction that was granted in Seattle, would cause chaos. I think the government, when it ordered the airports to let people in and to act as if there was no order in effect, sealed their own fate, because you're not going to get a court to undo that and then have to undo it again if they come to a different decision. So I think the Trump administration will lose the initial battle about the stay, but I think they may very well win ultimately when it gets to the Supreme Court. I do not believe that this order constitutes a violation of the Establishment Clause of the Constitution. The fact that they picked 7 Muslim states, those are the states that have high levels of terrorism. We're talking about Islamic terrorism. What did they have to do? Throw in Armenia or Israel in order to satisfy the Constitution? That's absurd. And then they exempted minority religions. Well, that makes a lot of sense. In 1945, the government passed a statute for the War Refugee Act, which was focused exclusively on Jews because Jews were the victims of the Holocaust. So when you focus on real victims or real perpetrators and the impact is heavily on one particular religion, that doesn't create a constitutional problem. So I think that the Trump administration will ultimately win on that issue, at least as it relates to people who have never been in the United States.
Alan, I don't know if you sat and listened to that telephone hookup and the presentation that was made to the Ninth Circuit.
I did, yeah.
I didn't hear much about the Constitution there. I heard some judges asking for examples that of people being convicted for terror acts. We heard the Solicitor General of Washington State offering his political evaluation. Alan, are we just supposed to set aside the judicial canons and just say, well, look, politics gets into everything? Or has the court, and more importantly, have officers of the court strayed from the specific argument on constitutionality what branch does what, and what statutes exist in case law to allow the chief executive to carry out this ban or fail to do so?
I think it was the government that started by starting its argument focusing on how good the policy was. They should have focused on the constitutionality issues, on the standing issues, because I think there's a hard question about whether the state of Washington has standing. And as far as the judges being political, of course the Supreme Court is political. The best evidence of it is look who President Trump just appointed to this, nominated to the Supreme Court. He appointed him clearly because he likes his politics. He didn't appoint Merrick Garland because Merrick Garland had been nominated by a Democratic president. So of course you're going to get politics entering into Supreme Court decisions. And it's not surprising that of the three judges yesterday, two of them were Democrats, one was a Republican, and the Republicans seemed more sympathetic to the views of President Trump than the Democrats. But hopefully they will ultimately apply the rule of law. And there are precedents here that should apply, and it's a complicated issue. I could teach a whole seminar in this case.
And we only have about 4 minutes, so let me go to another part of this. Judge Robart, the federal judge in Washington State who stopped all this, described by the New York Times as a, quote, mainstream Republican. It's interesting how the Times evaluates mainstream Republicanism. But again, back to the judicial canons. Now, he was involved in a couple of things that I think, apart from his time on the bench, would be laudatory, where he offered pro bono legal time to refugees and immigrants from Southeast Asia. How he and his wife actually opened their home to be foster parents for Southeast Asian children. Again, in a vacuum, that's exemplary. But he's now on the bench, and he takes up a case that deals with something that by the second judicial canon of conduct for federal judges seems to me, just evaluating common sense, what is reasonable, to be outside of it. Shouldn't Judge Robart have recused himself from this case? And it's gotten so bad, Tom DeLay was on this program earlier suggesting Judge Robart should be impeached.
Oh, that's ridiculous. Look, when Tom DeLay was indicted, I came to his support because I'm not political about these things. I thought it was a mistake to go after him for what he did, which was really politics as usual. But it's absurd to think that the judge should be impeached. I didn't agree with his decision largely, but I don't think he should have been recused. He didn't get himself involved in the case. He was picked randomly by the wheel. Every judge has a history and a background. The fact that he's sympathetic to refugees. I'm sympathetic to refugees. Many people are. My family came over as refugees. There are judges on the Ninth Circuit whose families came over as refugees. You can't recuse judges just because they have backgrounds. Justice Scalia said on many cases where he had strong opinions and refused to recuse himself, even when he went hunting with the vice president. So I think that's an argument that's made by people who aren't happy with the result. You're going to always get judges who have some connection. There are rules, and the rules say that if you've been involved in this specific case, you can't sit on it, which is why Justice Kagan recused herself from a number of cases. But beyond that, I think the cases should be handled by whoever judge is picked out of the wheel. You know, the Ninth Circuit has a lot of very conservative judges, a lot of liberal judges. The Trump administration got a bad deal when they got 2 Democrats. They might as easily have gotten 3 Republicans. So the case will go to the Supreme Court. It may split 4-4. And that will be interesting because we also have a case in Massachusetts where you have a liberal judge who went in favor of the Trump administration, even though generally he's regarded as quite liberal in his views.
Final 30 seconds, just to ask you, I know you say you're kind of stepping back here from politics, but the fact that Washington State claimed to be the aggrieved party, taking it to federal court there, putting it in the Ninth Circuit, known as the liberal and most overturned circuit court, this thing to me, as a guy, yes, I'm guilty of politics, having served 6 terms in the House, this seems to me a political strategy to go judge shopping. What say you in the final 30 seconds?
Well, of course, the other litigant went in the First Circuit, went in Massachusetts, which is generally regarded as a fairly moderate court. They could have appealed as well, and they didn't appeal. They chose not to appeal from that. So I don't think that this was judicial shopping. The Ninth Circuit is roulette wheel. It's called judicial roulette. You never know who you're going to get. And when it goes in bank, you never know what the decision is going to be. So, I do think it's very important that we have a system of checks and balances in place. We're the only country in the world that has a judiciary that is equal to the presidency, and that's a good thing.
And on that note, Alan Dershowitz, we thank you for your time tonight on Newsmax Prime.